Hey guys! So today we are going to answer a subscriber question, and the question in question is, Fredrik, why do programming languages have frameworks? Why don't we just add those into the language as is? So let's get into it. Well, that is a very good question, and I can only give you I can give you two perspectives on this. One perspective is that it is actually the case that some languages actually do have, a lot of languages actually have some type of support for doing the sort of stuff that frameworks usually do. An example is that if you use Golang, I would be very surprised if you felt the need to use a web framework of some sort, because Go actually has a really nice built-in framework for doing network connections and doing routing and doing all that good stuff. But for a language, and take Node.js. Node.js has support for it, but most people use Express because it's a much nicer experience. So one perspective can be that having a framework, sometimes it is actually part of the language, sometimes it's not. It's very hard for me to say to explain the motivation behind each and every decision for having it in the framework, in the language, or having it outside of the language. But I will give you the second perspective, and that is probably the best way I can describe this. If I were to just kind of spitball a little bit here and go into speculation mode, I would argue that depending on the direction of the people behind the language, it makes more or less sense to have a framework as an external thing or as an internal thing. Let me explain. You see, if you are a really large organization and you want to have let's take Go as an example. Google may not necessarily be interested in having third parties actively being in control of something that is closely associated with their product. Just let me explain. Think about it this way. Google has the ability, Go was originally developed for their internal use. They have they have opened it up to the rest of the world pretty much. Now, they are an organization that can truly contribute to this platform. This is not just a bunch of people who do this, a few people here and there who do this on the side of their real job. They maintain this as an active live product. So they have the resources to really maintain this. Now, Go's actual use case is network-based programming. It is the strongest use case that it has. So it makes a lot of sense that something if it's designed to do this, it doesn't really make sense to have an external framework to do this. And if you think about it from Google's perspective, having all these services, which is kind of the way that Go is being used to create these, well, I'm not saying microservices, but a service-oriented architecture. So having one single way of doing everything that is consistent over an ecosystem of maybe thousands, if not even more, hundreds of thousands maybe, services all across a massive system, it's actually, there's a lot of benefit in that, because there's one way of doing things, and that's the only way you do it. That consistency is very powerful, and there's no real downside, because the organization behind Go is so massive that they can produce new feature requirements. They can keep up with the demand to the language. Right. Now let's flip that and say we take something like Node.js. Now Node.js also has quite a lot of backing, but not in the same league, if we talk about the organization behind Node, as say Go. Go and Google, that's their stuff. They can pretty much go as fast as they want, and they have the resources. But Node does not. Node very much depends on contributors and open source and all that good stuff, which means that there is actually there's a big benefit to having third parties provide frameworks instead of trying to internalize it. Because once you internalize something into your product, you take a risk. This is the risk that Java had. And it's actually the way that HTML and the organizations behind, they kind of realized this a while back, and this is why open source becomes more and more popular. If you are to say, hey guys, this is our language, And we will first-hand support, and we want to control. We will support everything. We will give you everything that you need, but we want to control it. We don't want other people to just build tools on top of our tool because we want to control it. When you state that as an organization, you'd have to be damn sure that you can keep up with the demand, because if you can't, some other language that has the ability to move faster and provide things quicker to the programmers who want to use your stuff is going to win. It's that simple. It's going to take over because they can move faster, and they can, because you guys, you may not think so, but there's actually quite a lot of demand on the people who provide these programming languages to add features and all of this good stuff, and they kind of have to cater. A lot of the times they do have to cater in order to keep up with that demand. So having something open source gives you actually an ability to move faster as a language. The language can actually develop much quicker because there's people who, just because they're nice or just because of their own interests, depending on, you know, how they do it. I mean, if somebody builds, take Express as an example for Node.js. Now, I will argue that Node in of itself absolutely brought a lot of value to JavaScript as a server-side language, but Express is the thing that really kicked off the whole thing. Express is by far and wide, I will argue, this is of course my own opinion, but it's the framework that made Node into a viable solution for the server, something that can be used in production environments. And that is the other side of it. So if you really think about it, what do you think? It might not have been the case that Node had gotten as popular as it is today if it wasn't because they had this idea of, all right, we focus on the core of the language, we focus on empowering people to build tools on top of Node. So what I argue is that there's two strategies, and depending on the organization behind the language and the motivation, or rather the direction that these people want to push the language in, that's the thing that determines whether or not something's going to be internal to the language or if something is going to be a framework that is outside of it. So what I want you to take away from this is that when a company or an organization decides to internalize a framework or a solution to doing something that usually is, you know, very commonly is a framework, like a web framework, it is vital that that organization has the capacity to maintain this and provide an experience to all the developers that needs to use this language that is so great that they don't feel like they're being blocked, that they don't get frustrated by the speed or the direction that the language is heading in, because if they do, they will start migrating over to something else. So it's important that that organization really can keep up with that demand. And on the flip side, if you are a smaller organization or an organization that is in heavy need of like contributors and open source and stuff like that, it makes a lot of sense to have things as an external framework, because that can offload you from having to maintain these external tools, and you empower other people to basically do that work for you. I mean, the language popularity goes up. It doesn't really always matter so much if you are the person in charge of the tools that are associated with your platform, unless that is your business case, like say with Oracle and Java. That's a different case. Same thing goes for C#, .NET, and Microsoft. But remember, once again, it depends on the organization behind the language and what their goal is with that language. Have a great day.